Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a breakdown on why Republicans will win the midterms, why they're going to win the House, the Senate, and many of the governorships, and break down what the impact and result likely the recent Biden speech will have on that. So recently we saw this speech from Biden. This was the actual backdrop. This isn't photoshopped, which is comical, but at the same time, in some ways, horrifying, but also very, very symbolic of what his administration is and has been, especially if you listen to the speech. It was, they complained about Trump being divisive, and then you see this from this idiot of a man, this complete. Well, really, he's more senile, honestly. I'm pretty sure this was just a handed down speech from Democrats and those in power for him to give on why his opponents are evil and dangerous, because they are a threat to him. He's not wrong. We are a threat. MAGA Republicans are a threat to him, not in the same sense that he thinks. We are his enemy, but again, not in the sense that they're trying to paint it as. But the point stands. His speech was destructive, wrong, misleading, completely unfactual, and quite naive. But it will also be very divisive and disagreeable amongst most voters, even independents, and I'm going to show the impact that I think it'll have. And we've already seen some reversals in supposed trends anyway from the polling. So Republicans will win the midterms. Now, despite some of the horrendous polling we're getting from a lot of supposedly independent pollsters, Republicans are supposedly down, at least in the 538 average, by a point. Now, 538's model is garbage. It's not accurate whatsoever. And you can tell, like, the most accurate poll they actually have on here is Trafalgar Group, despite them being, it's a Republican pollster, yet they're more accurate, weirdly. And they have Republicans up by a higher margin. Rasmussen is also a very accurate pollster. And as you can see as well, the polls that they include to weight into this, this would be higher if they didn't weight these polls the same as the more conservative leaning polls, as we see here. They pretty much weight these polls at the same level or more because, well, they're Democrat pollsters, even though they're supposedly not. The issues with these polls, like I've mentioned it before, I haven't entirely gone in depth on it, but using registered voters or just adults as a measure for a poll is ridiculous and it's inaccurate. It's not a good way to do a poll, and it's not going to actually poll people who are going to vote. It doesn't take into account enthusiasm either, which is a very, very important factor, which I'll get into a little bit later as well. But despite this, the more accurate pollsters being the likely voter polls, as well as Rasmussen and Trafalgar, arguably two of the most accurate polls. And then another very accurate pollster, I'd argue the most accurate, being the Rich Barris polls, the People's Pundit polls. His polls being by far the most accurate, I'd argue, for the most part, even though they don't like him because, he's right sometimes. He doesn't manipulate the data to discourage Republicans and hopefully prevent less of them from voting. But see, this is the thing. Republicans will win it. If we go to the RCP polling averages right here, we can see the RCP polling averages actually have Republicans doing better because they're at least a bit better of a model than the 538 averages. And despite that, the polls they use are more accurate. They weight polls more accurately. And as a whole, their model is just better, which is an important thing to consider. But we also have to consider this, polls don't accurately estimate or measure for Republican support. They always underestimate the support. We saw this here. If we go to 2014, only 2 points ahead. And if we look closer at what happened in 2014, Republicans were ahead by more than that in the final results. As you can see here, the actual final results were a 5.7 margin. The polls only had a 2.4. So that's a 3.2, 3.3 margin that they were off. That is a very big margin. That's something to consider. the polling is not very accurate, and it always underestimates Republicans. So even if this is where it is now, and it likely will continue to shoot up, actually, I think it's going to see a reversal in trend, especially after the speech from Mr. Pedo Hitler over here. Likely, I do see the polls starting to reverse, and we saw this recently with a few different polls, but most importantly, what will win the midterms for Republicans is independent support and enthusiasm. Right now, Joe Biden is not popular, and this is not going to help. It may help with a core group of progressive Democrats, but independents are not going to like that. Independent disapproval of Biden is at an all-time high, and it's going to continue to increase. And you can see this from YouGov, a YouGov poll of independents. YouGov, not a conservative pollster whatsoever, only a 32% approval for Biden amongst independents. That is not good. And even the congressional ballot, Republicans are winning the independent vote by 6. And even Trump is winning the independents, which is a massive, massive margin and number to consider when we're looking at the 2022 midterms and even further on to the 2024 election. Another thing to look at is, again, the most accurate pollster being People's Pundit, CD Media, the Pennsylvania. This is the biggest area where we've started to see a reversal or a change in trend, especially since this speech. But we see, again, he uses likely voters, which is important. There's a margin of error of 3.2, but Republicans are up in the PA generic ballot by 6 congressionally. So that is a big thing to consider. And amongst independents, they're up 19. Now, this will build on to the point that overall Pennsylvania is trending to the right, even if Democrats don't want to accept it, but it's important to consider. And we can also see here, YouGov again, this is more on the enthusiasm, which is another very important thing. Even if Democrats are being polled, oh, yeah, okay, well, we'll vote for Democrats, and Republicans are being polled, it has to, that isn't important if they aren't going out to vote. So you have to consider how likely these people are to vote, and you have to consider enthusiasm. And right now, Republicans have a massive monopoly on enthusiasm, which will ultimately be part of the reason why this poll, these averages, will not be that accurate. With enthusiasm on Republicans' side, polling trends starting to reverse, it makes no sense looking at these polls why Republicans would be behind, because Republicans and Democrats, for the most part, make up a fairly similar amount within the country overall. And this is part of why the red wave will continue, and there will be a red wave year, and why Republicans are going to win the midterms. But most importantly as well, pretty much the biggest group being independents. Right here, independents are also by far voting in Republican favor. So if independents are splitting for Republicans by a large number and Republicans have enthusiasm, these polls don't make sense. And if you look at them again, this is why they don't make sense. They are doing registered adult registered voters. Those are not accurate polls. That is not how you do a poll. And again, you can look back. I can do a video on this in the future. If you look at how accurate these pollsters are, they have been much less accurate than groups like Trafalgar or Rasmussen. Another area of these trends shifting, again, is Pennsylvania. This is more on the Pennsylvania one. This is more in depth from People's Pundit. We can see Fetterman ahead by 4. That is much closer than most of the other pollsters. And some people say, oh, well, Fetterman's going to win. Fetterman only has 44%. Think about that. Okay. There is 16% outstanding, and the reason for that is because there's a lot of Republicans who don't like Oz, but who will ultimately, in the end, probably end up voting for Oz because they don't want Fetterman, because he's a borderline socialist, and he is pretty much incapable of actually doing the job of a senator. If he's not mentally capable of debating, he's not mentally capable to be a senator. But this is the thing. This is the point. These polls are not accounting as well for some things like, especially with Pennsylvania's case, how much people don't really like Oz. In the end, Oz's unpopularity will likely not be an issue because, yes, it'll be a problem. But those people, those Republicans holding out who don't really like him, will in the end vote for him. Now, okay, this is not a video on why Pennsylvania will go Republican. It is why the midterms will end up ultimately being won by Republicans. But this is still very important to that point. We see this reversal in trends in the state of Pennsylvania, where there were many polls who actually had Fetterman ahead by much, much, much more. And now we're starting to see a lot more polls coming out that show it much closer in a tighter race. Same here, Mastriano being only 1 point behind Josh Shapiro. And again, the closer we get, these margins will get thinner and thinner. We even see Trump ahead of Biden by 7%. That is massive. But okay, this all comes together to being the point that these polls are not accurate, and they won't be, just like they weren't in 2014. Republicans ultimately will win the midterms. Whether it be by a large margin or a mild margin, they're still going to win the House, the Senate, and many of the governorships. This will be a red wave, even if there are people who don't think it will be. Anyone who's delusional enough to think Democrats will actually hold on in the Senate, and then anyone who's actually capable of believing that the Democrats could hold the House, they need to get their head checked, because everything past-wise, any historical trends we see, every single piece of history related to these kinds of elections shows us that they are wrong, and that Republicans will win. Even if they don't like it, they will. See, this is the thing. This speech right here will not help that case either. Like, you talk about this divisive stuff that they supposedly had from Trump, but then you get this out of Biden. That's not going to look good. Anyways, that is why I think that Republicans will win the 2022 midterm elections, despite what some inaccurate pollsters and some ridiculous Democrats might believe. Overall, Republicans will win. You can count on it, but to make sure that happens, you need to get out and vote. Make sure you bring friends and register at polling stations to make sure this is a safe and a fair election. Anyways, that's all for now. Before I go, I would just ask that you please consider subscribing if you are new and you like the video. Leave a like as well if you want to see more videos in the future like this. Also comment, give me some video ideas that I could do. Let me know what you think about the video. Anyways, that's all for now. Hope you guys have a good night.